My name is Jordan. I'm 32 years old, and 3 months ago, I stood in a ballroom full of strangers while my own family sat at a table 20 feet away pretending they didn't know me, until the father of the bride crossed the entire room to shake my hand, and the look on my mother's face when he did it is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life, not because it was cruel. Because it was the first time in 32 years that someone outside my own head finally said out loud what I had been quietly building toward in the dark. I didn't plan for it to happen that way. I didn't know he would recognize me. I didn't know my family would be there. I just showed up to do the job I had spent 6 years building from nothing, in a rented studio apartment, with second-hand equipment and a father's voice in my head telling me I was throwing my life away. The ballroom didn't care about any of that. Neither did he. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where we tell quiet stories about people who kept going when their own blood told them to stop. If you've ever been the one your family wrote off, the one they introduced last and explained away first, this one is for you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. And hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Let me take you back 6 years to the Sunday dinner where my family took a vote on my future and lost. Before I tell you what happened in that ballroom, you need to understand who I was before it. Not who I am now, who I was then. Because the distance between those two people is the whole story. I grew up in a family that measured worth in credentials. My father, David, had been an engineer for 30 years. My mother, Patricia, was a high school vice principal. My older sister, Rachel, had gone to law school on a partial scholarship and never let anyone forget it. My younger brother Ethan was in his second year of medical school when I was 26 and had already been framed on the wall of my parents' hallway in a white coat he had borrowed for the photo. There was a wall in that hallway. Literally, a wall of achievements. Rachel's bar passage certificate, Ethan's dean's list letters, my father's retirement commendation from the firm. My mother's teaching awards, 3 of them, framed identically in dark wood. I am not on that wall. I never was, not because I didn't try. I went to college. I studied business, which my father called a real degree, said with exactly the emphasis that told you he didn't mean it. I graduated with a decent GPA and a minor in digital media that I never mentioned at Sunday dinners, because the one time I did, my father looked at the ceiling the way he did when he was deciding whether something was worth responding to. It wasn't. The thing I actually loved, the thing I had been doing since I was 17 with a camera I bought with 3 months of lawn mowing money, was photography. Not the kind families hang over fireplaces. The working kind. Events, portraits. The documentation of moments that people want kept forever. I was good at it. I knew I was good at it the way you know something true about yourself that no one around you is confirming. A quiet internal fact you carry alone for years, waiting for the world to catch up. My family's position on this was consistent and unified and delivered most frequently at Sunday dinners around the blue ceramic serving dish my mother had used since I was a child. Photography was a hobby. Hobbies did not pay mortgages. Real careers had trajectories you could explain to other people at parties. My father had a line he used when the subject came up, and it came up more than I would have liked. He would set his fork down, which was the signal that what followed was going to be serious, and he would say, "Jordan, I love you, but you are setting yourself up to fail." He said it the way he said everything, with the confidence of a man who had never been wrong about anything structural. Bridges he designed did not fall. Children who ignored his advice, in his view, did. My mother was softer about it, but landed in the same place. She had watched too many of her students chase impractical dreams, she said, and she loved me too much to watch me do the same. Rachel agreed, which she was always happy to do when it made her look responsible by comparison. Ethan mostly stayed out of it, which I gave him credit for. The word they used most, quietly, in the way families say things they don't realize they're saying, was potential, as in wasted, as in all that potential and this is what you're doing with it. As in we expected more and we want you to know it without us having to say it plainly, so we'll just say potential until you hear the word underneath it. I heard it. I just kept shooting anyway. By the time I was 26, I had done 100 events for almost no money and a portfolio that I was proud of in the private way you're proud of things no one else has validated yet. Weddings for friends of friends who paid in installments. Corporate headshots for small businesses that paid better but felt like holding my breath. Enough to keep going, not enough to prove anything to anyone who needed proof. That summer my father sat me down after dinner, The others cleared out the way families clear out when they know a specific conversation is coming, and he told me he was worried. He laid it out like a brief. 6 years of trying, no studio, no staff, no benefits, no trajectory. He had spoken to a friend whose company was hiring, a real job, good salary, room to grow. He had already put in a word. He slid a piece of paper across the table with a name and a number on it and looked at me with the face of a man who believed he was saving someone. "I'm asking you to be realistic," he said. "I'm asking you to stop failing in slow motion and let me help you." I looked at that piece of paper for a long time. Then I looked at my father, who had framed everyone else's achievements on a wall in his hallway and left mine off it, not because I hadn't given him anything to frame, but because nothing I had done had come with a certificate he recognized. I told him I appreciated it. I told him I wasn't going to call the number. He picked up the paper, folded it once, put it in his shirt pocket, and said the thing he had been building toward for 6 years, the thing he would not be able to take back, the thing I would hear in the back of my head on every difficult day that followed. "You are the only failure in this family," he said. "I hope one day you understand I tried." He said it quietly. That was the thing about my father. He never raised his voice. He delivered verdicts at a conversational volume and then went to watch the news. I drove home. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building for a long time. I thought about the piece of paper in his shirt pocket. I thought about the wall in the hallway. I thought about the word potential, and every year it had been used against me. Then I went inside, and I edited the photos from a wedding I had shot the weekend before until 2 in the morning, because the work was the one place the feeling of that conversation couldn't follow me. If you're watching this, and a specific voice just played in your head, someone who delivered their disappointment in you at a conversational volume, you already know what I was sitting with that night. Comment below and tell me. Then stay with me because the ballroom is coming and you are going to want to see what happened in it. I want to tell you that I immediately doubled down and became successful out of spite, and it was cinematic. That is not what happened. What happened was slower and harder and less satisfying in the short term than any story you'd want to watch. What happened was that I kept going, quietly, without announcement. The way you keep doing a thing when the only alternative is to prove the people who doubted you right, and you are not willing to do that, not because of them, but because somewhere underneath the hurt there is still a version of you who knows what you're capable of and is not ready to let go of it. I got better. That is the only honest way to say it. I got better at the craft, at the business, at understanding what people wanted when they hired someone to capture the best day of their life. I started charging what I was worth, which was terrifying the first time and clarifying after that. I built a website that looked like the work I wanted to be hired for. I turned down the jobs that didn't fit and said yes to the ones that stretched me. I stopped going to Sunday dinners, not dramatically, not with a speech. I just got busier, and then I stayed busy, and after a while the invitations came less frequently because my family had calibrated to my absence the way families do when a member stops making space for the performance. My mother called occasionally. The conversations were careful and short, the kind where two people speak in the layer above the thing they're actually thinking about. She asked about my health. I asked about hers. Neither of us mentioned my father's verdict or the wall in the hallway. I think she believed, the way mothers sometimes do, that the trouble between us was a phase the men in her family were too stubborn to end first. I didn't call my father. He didn't call me. We existed in the same city the way two weather systems do, aware of each other, occasionally visible on the same horizon, not yet intersecting. I kept working. In my 4th year of real professional work, I got a referral that changed the size of the rooms I was working in. A client whose corporate anniversary event I had shot passed my name to her colleague, who passed it to his daughter, who was planning a wedding that cost more than my parents' house. I went to the consultation in a building with a doorman and came out with a contract that made my hands shake slightly on the elevator down. I delivered that job and it led to another, and then another. Word moves fast in rooms with money. Not because rich people are more impressed by good work than anyone else, but because they talk to each other constantly and they talk specifically, and when they like something they say so with names and numbers attached. By the time I was 31, I had a studio. An actual studio, leased, with my name on the door and equipment I had bought new for the first time in my life. I had 2 associates who shot with me on large jobs. I had a waiting list. I did not call my father to tell him. I thought about it, briefly. I picked up my phone one evening and held it and thought about what it would feel like to say the thing I had been building toward for 6 years. To let the facts speak the way he had let his verdict speak, at a conversational volume, with no drama required. I put the phone down. The work knew what it was. I didn't need him to. I want you to understand that I was not waiting for a moment. I was not strategizing. I was living my actual life, the one I had built without anyone's permission or assistance, and I was good at it, and that was enough. It had been enough for a while. The ballroom was not something I saw coming. The call came through my studio email on a Thursday afternoon in October. A wedding inquiry for the following June. The family name I didn't recognize. The venue I recognized immediately. The kind of place that shows up in architectural magazines. The kind of ceiling that makes photographers think about light before they think about anything else. I took the consultation, met the couple, liked them both, signed the contract. I did not know whose daughter she was. I found out the week before the wedding when her father's name appeared in a profile piece in a business publication my associate sent me as a joke. The kind of joke that is also a nervous heads-up. The father of the bride was Thomas Whitfield, founder of a media and creative agency that had, among other things, published 2 of the most circulated photography books of the last decade and contracted some of the most recognized commercial photographers working today. He was, in the specific world I had been building my career inside, someone whose opinion meant something. Someone who had spent 40 years developing an eye for the kind of work I spent every day trying to make. I went back to my contract, read it twice. Then I called my associate and told her to clear her weekend. I want to be precise about the night of the wedding because the details are the whole thing. The venue was everything the photos had promised. 300 guests, the kind of room that makes you understand why people spend years planning a single evening. I arrived 2 hours before the ceremony the way I always do, walked the space, mapped the light, identified the moments I could not afford to miss, and the angles no one else would think to take. I worked. The way I always work, which is completely and without a thought for anything outside the frame. The ceremony was beautiful. The couple was present in the way that makes the job feel like something other than a job. During the reception, I moved through the room the way I had learned to, visible enough to catch what I needed and quiet enough that people forgot I was there, which is how you get the real ones, the unguarded ones, the photographs people look at 20 years later and feel the room again. I was near the edge of the dance floor, changing a lens, when someone stopped beside me. I looked up. Thomas Whitfield was a tall man in his 60s with the kind of face that had been looking carefully at things for a very long time. He was holding a glass of champagne and looking at me with an expression I recognized from consultations, the expression of someone who has already formed an opinion and is deciding whether to share it. "Jordan Calloway," he said. It was not a question. I told him I was. He told me he had seen my work. Not tonight's, he said, though he'd been watching me work all evening. He had seen a series I had shot for a non-profit 2 years earlier, a long-form documentation project I had done for almost nothing because the subject mattered to me and I had the time, and it was the kind of work I did between the paying jobs to remind myself why I did the paying jobs. He had seen it in a gallery submission. It had not been selected. But he had kept the contact card, he said. "I've been waiting to see what you'd do next." Stood there in that ballroom with a lens in my hand and felt something move through me that I do not entirely have a word for. Not pride exactly. Something quieter and more structural than pride. The feeling of a thing being confirmed that you have known privately for a long time and were not sure anyone else would ever see. We talked for a few minutes. He asked specific questions, the kind only someone who understood the work would ask. I answered them. He told me he would be in touch about a project he was assembling. He shook my hand the way people shake hands when they mean it. Then he went back to his daughter's wedding and I went back to mine. I did not know my family was there until I turned around. My mother and father were seated at a table 12 feet away. Rachel beside them. Ethan and his wife on the other side. They were guests I hadn't known about, connections through a mutual family friend I had never considered, and they had been sitting there long enough to have watched the entire conversation. My father's fork was set down on his plate. The signal. Except this time there was no verdict being prepared. This time he was just looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before, not in 32 years, and I knew every expression my father owned. My mother's hand was over her mouth. Rachel was looking at the table. I stood there for a moment with Thomas Whitfield's handshake still in my palm, and my family's faces arranged in front of me, and I felt the full weight of 6 years land all at once. Not anger, not satisfaction, something more complex and more human than either of those. The 7-year-old version of me who had first picked up a camera and understood immediately that this was the thing he was for wanted to walk over to that table and show them the contract and the waiting list and the studio with my name on the door. The 32-year-old version of me understood that the evidence had already presented itself and there was nothing left for me to add. I picked up my camera. I went back to work. There were still 4 hours of this wedding left, and Thomas Whitfield's daughter deserved every one of them. My father came to find me near the end of the evening. I was packing a bag near the side exit, and I heard his footsteps and knew them before I turned around, because you always know the footsteps of the people who shaped you. He looked smaller than I remembered. That happens sometimes when a very certain person encounters something they didn't predict. He said my name. I turned around. He stood there for a moment, and I could see him searching for the architecture of what he wanted to say, the way he always built his sentences before he delivered them. Only this time the structure wasn't coming together the way it usually did. This time the facts were not cooperating with the verdict. That man, he said finally, he knew your work. I said, he sought you out. My father looked at the floor briefly and then back at me and said the thing I had not known I was waiting for until it arrived. I was wrong, he said, about what you were capable of. I'm proud of you, not I'm sorry. My father was not built for those sentences, and I had stopped expecting them a long time ago. But wrong was a word my father had never once applied to himself in my direction, and I understood what it cost him, and I decided, standing there, that it was enough. Not because I owed him the absolution, because I didn't need him to pay any larger a price than this to give me what I had already given myself. I know, I said. He nodded once. The way he nodded when a thing was settled. I zipped my bag and picked it up. I looked at my father in the low light of that ballroom, the man who had delivered his disappointment in me at a conversational volume for 6 years, who was now standing in the proof that he had been wrong and bearing it with as much dignity as he had. Be at Sunday dinner, I said. When I'm not working, it was not a surrender. It was not a forgiveness speech. It was just the truth. He was my father. The wall in the hallway still didn't have my name on it, but I had stopped needing it to. I walked out of the ballroom into the cool night air and stood beside my car for a moment with my equipment at my feet and the sounds of a wedding still drifting out through the closed doors behind me. I thought about the piece of paper he had slid across the table 6 years ago, the folded failure, the name and number of a life I had not chosen. I thought about every Sunday dinner I had sat through with a camera bag in my trunk and a secret in my chest, the quiet knowledge of what I was building while everyone at that table agreed on what I was losing. I thought about Thomas Whitfield's handshake, the non-profit series he had kept a card for, the 2 years he had spent waiting to see what I would do next. I got in my car and I drove to my studio, the one with my name on the door and equipment I had bought new for the first time in my life. I made a coffee and I began editing the night's work, and the photographs were exactly what I knew they would be because I had spent 6 years becoming the person who could make them. My father was wrong, and now he knew it, and now I didn't have to carry that alone anymore. That was all I had ever needed. Not the wall, not the framing. Just for the facts to say what I had been unable to, they did in the end. In a ballroom in front of 300 people, and the one man whose opinion in that specific world meant something, and a family that had run out of things to say. The facts are patient that way. Here is how it actually settled, because I know you want to know. Thomas Whitfield called my studio 2 weeks later. The project he had mentioned was a long-form documentary series for a book his agency was producing, exactly the kind of work I had been doing in between the paying jobs for years. I took it. It ran for 8 months, and it was the hardest and best work I have ever done, and when it was published my name was in it, right there in the front, in the way that means something to people who understand what it means. My father bought a copy. I know because my mother told me, which is the way information moves in my family, carried quietly by the person in the middle who absorbs everything. She told me something else too. She told me he had taken something off the wall in the hallway, not to make room. Just because he looked at it one afternoon and it didn't seem complete anymore, and he was a precise man who did not like incomplete things. The space is still there. He hasn't filled it yet. I go to Sunday dinners when I'm not working. We talk around the edges of what happened, the way families talk when the real conversation has already occurred in a ballroom and everyone present understood it, and no one needs to say it again. Rachel asks about the business now. Genuine questions, the kind without an edge. Uthan texted me last month to ask if I'd consider shooting his kids' portraits, which is the closest thing to an apology he knows how to give, and I took it as one. My mother still uses the blue ceramic serving dish. Some things are not about the people around them. Some things are just the dish. I kept shooting. I kept building. I took on 2 more associates and moved into a larger studio and started teaching a workshop for emerging photographers on Saturday mornings, because I know what it feels like to be good at something in a room full of people who have decided you're not, and I want to be one of the voices that says keep going before someone has to spend 6 years finding out the hard way. The wall in my parents' hallway still has a space on it. I'm not waiting for him to fill it. I already know what I am. If I leave you with one thing, let it be this. The people who told you that you were failing were reading a story that wasn't finished yet. They saw a chapter and called it the ending. They saw the studio apartment and the second-hand equipment and the Sunday dinners where you couldn't explain yourself in language they recognized, and they made a verdict, and they delivered it at a conversational volume, and they folded it up and put it in a shirt pocket and thought that was the last word. It was not the last word. The last word belongs to the work. It always has. It always will. The work doesn't care who doubted you. It only asks if you showed up and whether you got better and whether you kept going when the room you were in had decided what you were before you had the chance to show them. Keep going. The ballroom is coming. You just have to still be working when you walk into it. That's my story. A family that took a vote on my future without asking me. A camera I bought with lawn mowing money. And a handshake in a ballroom that said everything 6 years of Sunday dinners couldn't. If this reminded you that the people who count you out were never the ones who got to count you, take that with you today. Share this with someone who is still in the quiet years, still building what no one around them can see yet. Drop a comment below and tell me who in your life kept going when everyone else had already decided. Hit subscribe. And I will see you in the next one.